All right. I can see that they demoted me from the most holy place. Thank God, thank God. I've read somewhere that at 2:34 p.m. is the lowest point in the biorhythm on an average. Things are looking up. It's 2:37 on my watch, maybe it's a little bit less on yours, but things should be looking up. You should be coming out of deep slumber right now and being able to capture things again. So I want to take you 2 steps back now. 1 step in time, and this is now the previous site that we've been excavating. We excavated that site, Kibbutz Kayafa, which proved to be the biblical Sha'arayim, and I'll speak about that in a moment, which is a site that we dug from 2007. It was started, we joined in 2008. We finished in 2013, but the last season we didn't participate anymore. We already started at Lachish. So this is, the overall exploration was from 2007, 2013, but we really participated only a little bit less of that time. A very fascinating site. It has been the crucial site for the historicity of King David and the history of the 10th century BC period in ancient Israel, the time of the United Monarchy, the time of David. This is a photo of the site that you can see there. It is a much smaller site than Lachish, and I'll talk about this in a moment. We have had the wonderful experience to excavate it, and again I'll show the institutions to whom I'm indebted. This is kind of my disclaimer page. I've done the credit. Let's move on. All right. I spoke a little bit about publication with a couple of people over lunch. You know, you archaeologists love to excavate. It's exciting to be out in the field. Your right is where the spade hits not the road, but the earth. The rubber hits the road and the spade hits the earth. This is where the exciting finds come up. This is where you're really on the cutting edge of archaeology. However, if you do not publish, it is as if you'd never excavated. This is the reality of it. It's nice to give lectures, and you are very graciously listening to it, but that's where it will stay. It will change something maybe in your view about God, but there is no real record that stays of it. Maybe there's a video, but that is about it. If we do not publish what we've excavated, we have not done responsible scholarship, responsible science. And there are a lot of excavations, and I could name them to you places. I will just name one place, Ashkelon. Ashkelon is one of the Pentapolis, one of the cities of the 5 cities of the Philistines. It has been excavated by a very, very important university, and this is Harvard University. I'm sure we all have heard of Harvard University. However, in 20 years, not much has been published. As a matter of fact, they finished their excavation project after more than 20 years last summer, and if you think of the publication, not much has come forward. So this is a very important aspect of our work, and while I will miss going to Israel in the summer and working, I will go throughout the year and do other things, but we will not excavate at least for the next 3 years and work on publication. We are completing the publication of our previous site. This is one of the volumes that we have published already. We have 4, there's a series of 7 volumes that we have published already. 3 have been published, and number 4, I'm very happy to report, on Thursday, the day before I traveled, I've been editing Kibbutz Kayafa Volume 4 for the last 4 months, since May, well, I guess 5 months almost. Since May, I've been editing this volume. It has contributions from more than 20 scholars from all over the world. I've written a number of chapters in there. I've did the scientific editing of all those chapters. It has now 300 pages and 364 illustrations. And I was so happy on Thursday afternoon to click the send button on my email. And in that moment, it was transported to Israel, where it will go through the next stage of the publication process. There's proofreading over there, then it will go to layout, and then it will be, hopefully before the end of the year, printed here in the US by Eisen Browns, which is a big academic publisher in Indiana. So this is another milestone, and it's wonderful to see that we have already of a project that was concluded in 2013, that we have already more than half published, and actually volume number 6 is also right now in editing. So this is good, and people have been very, very complimentary on that, that we've worked on that. And this was one of the reasons actually why I went to Southern, where I was invited to go there, because I have a little bit of experience in publishing. The one that you see up there, Khirbet Qeiyafa Volume 2, is a technical excavation report. I don't recommend you to read it unless you suffer under insomnia. It will certainly put you to sleep. All 706 pages with, I think, over 650 illustrations and pictures and images. And this is a technical excavation report that is really, we don't print a lot of that. That's not going to be on the New York Times bestseller list. We print between 500 and 1,000 volumes. They go mainly to big universities like the one that you have here down the road, San Diego, UC San Diego, and they will go into the collections and specialized collections. So this is one part of our publication work. Another part of our publication work is to make it accessible for the people that want to learn about biblical archaeology. So we also publish popular books. There is one on Khirbet Qeiyafa that is being printed in English right now. I'm forgetting the publisher right now, but it is coming out in the next couple of months, where you can read about this whole site in one book. Dr. Hasel was part of the co-authors of that book, and it's in an understandable English. It will not put you to sleep, hopefully. Let's move a little bit forward. Khirbet Qeiyafa looked like that at the beginning in 2007, before any excavations. We did not know what we were going into. And it was a site in the Shefelah, just south of Beersheba. If you look exactly where we find ourselves in the ancient Near East, you've got Israel here, of course, the Dead Sea, here the Jordan, very significant landmarkers that you have down there. By the way, the Dead Sea used to go down all the way until here. I don't know if you have noticed in the last decades how the Dead Sea is actually dying. It's shrinking. The Dead Sea, if you look at older maps, goes all the way down to here. There's still a little bit of water there, but it's all salination. It's all drying up. Of course, Israel also mines a lot of minerals down there, but the Dead Sea is dead. It will disappear. It evaporates at an enormous rate. When we go every year to Israel, we go and take the students to one afternoon to swim in the Dead Sea. I mean, you don't swim, you float basically. And if you get it into your eyes, mercy on you, it burns. It really, really burns. Or if you have a wound, you'll never be the same. You really come out pickled. It's a saline solution, and it's not very, very pleasing. But we come there, and every year, there used to be a springboard where you could jump into the Dead Sea. If you jump off that springboard now, you're going to hit very hard rock bottom, because it's not in the sea anymore. The sea is about 50 meters down the road, 50 yards down the road now. So this is rapidly disappearing. The site of Khirbet Qeiyafa is about here. We talked about Lachish this morning. Within the ancient Near East, we are right in the middle of the Fertile Crescent of the southern Levant. Here we've got the map that I also showed this morning. Here's Kibbutz Kaiafa. Down here is Lachish, 1 day's walk, 2 days' walks from Jerusalem. Very significant find and site. And if you look here, if I mentioned this morning the site of Azekah, this is where the connection was between Jerusalem and Lachish in terms of the communication, the fire towers. And this is right across from Kibbutz Kaiafa. Now, interesting, sorry, let me just pull this back here. This site has become very important. If we look at the kingdom of Judah, if we read the Bible, the kingdom of Judah has been very important for the following reasons. First of all, that's where we have the Bible. That is where the writing of the Bible took place, of course, from an earlier pre-monarchic period, Moses writing the Pentateuch, and then going down in time, the book of Judges, Samuel and Kings, and then down the road, the prophetic writings, and all the way down to Esther. All of that is centered mostly in Judah, with the exception of the Pentateuch and a couple of books that were written by the northern prophets, and of course the books that were written in exile by Daniel and Ezekiel. So this is an important book. This is also the place where not only one world religion, but 3 world religions embraced monotheism. The Jews, the Arabs, and the Christians. They embraced monotheism. It is also a place where an iconic cult, where images were not worshipped, but a cult that does not have images. Have you ever asked yourself a very interesting story when Jerusalem is captured and Daniel and his friends are taken to Babylon? What does Nebuchadnezzar take as well, besides the captives? The vessels from the temple. Why did he do that? Now, there's an interesting fact of ancient Eastern warfare. Whenever in the ancient East a nation conquered another nation, they would go into the temple and take out the statues of the gods that the people worshipped. Because you didn't just conquer a nation, you conquered their gods as well. And we have images and reliefs that show how the gods were transported in a victorious procession into the home city and deposited in their own temple. Remember the story of the Philistines when they captured the Ark of Covenant? Where did they put it? It didn't go so well for Dagon. It was a bad idea. He had a fall and broke his nose. But the same principle. Nebuchadnezzar could not find a statue in the temple. So he took the next best thing, all the vessels. He just gathered all the vessels, and of course they were precious. And he took them home to Babylon. It didn't go so well, not with him, but with his grandson, Belshazzar, in chapter 5 of Daniel. We re-encounter those vessels, and in that moment God says, enough is enough. And the writing occurs on the wall. So we have an aniconic cult. We have, of course, the social laws. We will find some of that. Social institutions, the care of the orphans, widows, stranger, all of that is rooted in the Old Testament, in that specific place in Judah. And of course, Shabbat. This is the famous statue of David, Michelangelo, in Florence. It used to be in a plaza or in a piazza, but they prevented it from damage. I kind of put a text over the crucial place here that Michelangelo left exposed. But it's a beautiful Renaissance art. But really, this is about David. Was he really a historical person? Or was he just a legendary person? We know that all of this really started on a large scale with King David. Saul was a bad choice. Now, I will take a king according to what the people wish. Tall, handsome, good-looking. And it didn't go very well. And then comes King David, and he is a man after God's heart. The runt of the litter when Samuel comes to Jesse, and eventually he becomes King David. Biblical chronology dates him 1010 to 970 BC, in a very specific time period. Did he really live there? Did he really exist? And that is the big debate that is running right now. For thousands of years, biblical scholarship and tradition held onto to the Bible as absolutely representing absolute accurate historical data. And we have some early archaeologists, Benjamin Mazar, Yigal Yadin, William Foxwell Albright, American, the other two Israelis, that vehemently defended that, but sometimes not based on evidence, but rather based on the biblical text. For example, in Yadin, the gentleman on the right-hand side, who used to be actually in the army in the Israeli Defense Force, in the IDF, and became an archaeologist, and he identified the gates at Hatzor, which looks very much like the gate at Lachish. He identified it not on the basis of dating and archaeology, but on the basis of Bible activities. In the Bible, they're mentioning activities of Solomon building gates, and he said, okay, these must be the gates of Solomon. I think he was right, but the way he went about it was wrong. He didn't base it on archaeological data. He read in the Bible, and he said, okay, this must be that. I have seen people I've read people looking at something and saying, and taking the Bible and saying, okay, this is that. They saw I don't know if you ever heard about that, they saw a reef going underneath the surface of the Red Sea, and they looked at the Bible and read, God led his people through the sea, and they said, this is the route of the Exodus. This is the way the Israelites went across the Red Sea. This is not archaeology. This is not archaeology. Archaeology uses and scientific data, and thus this approach to archaeology has created a backlash from other scholars that went totally in the total direction. And I'm presenting the so-called minimalist theory, and we have been, how can I say, we've had the privilege to engage with those scholars, and through the finds of Kibbutz Kayafa, a lot of that has been refuted. But they reacted against this Bible approach of archaeology. Here's the Bible, and here's the spade, and you read this, and you look at something and say, this is it. And this is not what we can, as we should do it. But they went totally into the other direction, and in the 1980s, the School of Minimalism developed, and they said the Bible was not written in early times. No ways that Moses wrote it, and they said no ways that the prophets wrote it. The Psalms were written totally after the exile, and everything was dated all the way down into the Hellenistic period, 700 years after the period that it described, 700 and more. They also suggested that David and Solomon were just mythological figures, like Michelangelo. Beautiful figure that he creates, but it's just a piece of art. They also say that a united kingdom never existed. There wasn't anything like a united kingdom, and they suggest that the kingdom of Israel was established first in the 9th century, 100 years later than what the Bible says, and that then the kingdom of Judah was established afterwards, and that would put it 300 years later than what the Bible puts David in. So this was a complete backlash against biblical archaeology in a negative sense, but effectively dismantled the whole Bible and the historicity of the whole Bible. And we find ourselves in this situation, within that struggle, and we started excavating Kibbutz Kayafa. Then, in 1993, there was the first find, and it's not only Kibbutz Kayafa, there have been other finds. In 1993, the first find came up that suddenly mentioned David as a historical person. It was found on the Tel Dan Stele in Dan, which is a site in the north of Israel. And Abraham Biran, a famous archaeologist from Israel, found an inscription, a monumental inscription, shattered into several fragments, which was written in Aramaic at the entrance to a city. It was written in the 9th century, dating to about 841 BC, and it was read, and as we all can see here, right here it says Beit David. If you can't see it, believe me. It says here, spelled from right to left, the second letter begins it. There's the equivalent of the Hebrew letter B, and it says Beit David, which translated means house of David, which is an ancient phrase for the dynasty of David. There was an Aramean king, and we know about the wars of the Arameans in the 9th century during the time of Ahab and King and Prophet Elijah, during exactly that period when the Arameans pushed again and again into Israel and made war there. And there was an Aramean king that erected that stele again in the entrance to the city of Dan, because he wanted to commemorate his victory over Israel, and he stated that he had finally defeated the house of David. David was long dead, but he had defeated the dynasty of David. And this was the first time that the name David was mentioned outside the Bible. Everybody got a shock. People tried to reinterpret. I mean, if you know Hebrew, there is no way in going wrong in interpreting this inscription. But I have seen the most ridiculous interpretations trying to distort that reading. I mean, it's as clear as day. House of David. You cannot misread this. Because they just didn't want to accept the fact that David actually is historically mentioned. So this was one of the first evidences that went on. And however, that did not undo the minimalist theory. The no chronology paradigm suggests that there was a transition from rural social organization, the judges, to a state, the king of Israel, around 900 BC, not 1000 BC. And Judah only came much later. Thus, David and Solomon were merely local tribal leaders. They then conceded, well, maybe they existed. But if they existed, then, well, they were kind of like a Bedouin village, the chief of a Bedouin village. Nothing permanent, nothing historically significant. And there was no kingdom, no fortified cities, no administration, no writing. This was the paradigm. Kubit Kayafa has undone every single one of those no's. And we'll see in a moment how that took place. This is a kind of a chronological suggestion how this looks like. This was the biblical tradition. This is Judah and Israel, and we can see actually that Judah started much earlier, and which connects then to the United Kingdom. And there's still not a lot of clarity about the origins of Israel, not from the biblical perspective, but from the archaeological perspective. So if we look at the site here, this is once more an image of where the places are located. Now you can see that Kibbutz Kayafa finds itself in a very strategic position. There are places around it that are mentioned in the Bible. Bet Shemesh, this is a north-south valley here, and then Azekah, also mentioned in the Bible, and Zuccoth, also mentioned in the Bible. And this crisscrosses, you see a river here, with an east-west valley. There are 5 east-west valleys that come down from the mountains, and this is one of them. That's the Elah Valley. If you ever visit Israel, your bus will probably stop in the Elah Valley, because something very important took place in that valley that connects to the story of David. Anybody wants to take a guess? What took place in the Elah Valley? The biggest fight of history, David against Goliath. David against Goliath, this was the fight that took place there, and it mentions the sites of Zuccoth and of Azekah, but it doesn't mention Kirbet Kayafa, or does it? We will see in a moment. If you look from above, you can see the strategic position there. There's the north-south valley that runs north-south. These are the the outskirts of modern Bet Shemesh. There's the site of Azekah, mostly Philistine. There's Zuccoth, and if you open your Bibles, let me grab my to 1 Samuel 17. This is the hymnal. This won't work. Thank you very much. 1 Samuel 17. 1 Samuel 17. Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and were gathered at Succoth, which belongs to Judah. They encamped between Succoth and Azekah in Ephes Damim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and draw up in battle array against the Philistines. It's all there. So where did they really come together? So the Philistines came from the west. Here's Azekah, here's Succoth, and here is the valley where it opens up, and this is where they camped against each other. One side of the valley, the Philistines, the other side of the valley, the Israelites. That is where that battle plays out. And Kirbet Kayafa happens to overlook this whole site. This is how it looks from above at the end of the excavation. This is now excavated after 5 years of excavations, quite differently to what we've seen before. Now, one of the interesting things, and if we look at it carefully, we'll see that this city has a gate here. Do you see this gate? But then it has a gate here as well. Why is that important? If you would build a city in ancient times, I don't know if you've ever played strategic games like Settlers of Catan or something like that. If you would build a city in ancient times, how many gates would you put in? Why? Safety, security, defense. You know, you have to think of defending all that. The more gates you have, the more difficult it is to defend. To find a city with 2 gates in ancient Israel is almost impossible, unless you're in Jerusalem. There you have more gates, and more as the city grows. But outside of Israel, out of Jerusalem, in Judah, I'm not aware of any other city that has 2 gates from the biblical period. Let's go back to 1 Samuel 17. The story unfolds, and all the way down, at the end of the story, in verse 52. In verse 51 is the end of Goliath, the demise of Goliath. David runs over there, takes his head. In verse 52 we read, "Now the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted." They suddenly realize what's going on. Suddenly they see that the impossible has happened. Young David has killed Goliath. And they realize that the situation has completely turned around. They shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road to Sha'araim, even as far as Gath and Ekron. We know where Gath and Ekron are. Gath and Ekron are cities of the Philistines. Gath, Ekron, Ashdod, Ashkelon, these are all cities of the Philistines. Until we excavated Kirbet Kayafa, we did not know where Sha'araim is. I will give you a little Hebrew lesson. Sha'araim has a meaning. In Hebrew, the word sha'ar means, thank you very much, Pastor. Pastor Samuel knows his Hebrew. It means gate. Sha'ar is gate. But it doesn't say just Sha'ar, it says Sha'arayim. In Hebrew, and I know that Pastor Samuel knows that as well, you have 3 different numbers. You have gender and number for a noun. You know, masculine, feminine is the gender, and the number is singular and plural. In Hebrew, you don't have just singular and plural, you also have a dual. And it's a special ending that is attached to the end of words that marks things that occur in pairs of 2. So Sha'arayim means gates, 2 gates. It really, Sha'arayim, if you would translate that place name, it would mean city of 2 gates. What do we have here? 1 gate, 2 gates. We realized, and when we discovered those 2 gates, we realized that we had found the biblical city of Sha'arayim. So there was a road that led past Sha'arayim, and this is where the Philistines fled. They ran over the hill to get to security, and they went into safety, and they went right across the entrance of Sha'arayim, and that's where a lot of people were already stationed, and that's where they were killed. The site, if you look at it from above, here is gate number, here's the gate that faces the Elah Valley, the way up to back to Hebron and Jerusalem, and this is the gate that faces the Bet Shemesh Valley, the north-south connection. So these gates made geographical sense, and it is the only city that we know from ancient Judah that has 2 gates. And the modern Kibbutz Kayaf is a modern name, is the ancient biblical site of Sha'arayim. And that was our first connection, strong connection to the story of David and identifying it with that city. We saw also that this was if you compare that, anybody remembers how big Lachish is? I know it's early in the afternoon, but it's after 2:34, so there's not much excuse. 20 hectares, very good. 2.3, this is a 1/10 of the site of Lachish. We've excavated at the end of everything with one expedition of about 5-6 years, we excavated 25% of the site. There's a lot of houses abutting the walls, and we have public buildings in Area A, a big building that we excavated in the very last season. You've got one law in archaeology. In the last season, on the last day, in the last 2 hours, you find the most important stuff. I've seen it, maybe not in that extreme, but I've seen it so often. It's always in the last moment where you find the most interesting things. So this is a very interesting city to begin with, and here we see a photo of the casemate wall. A casemate wall is a double wall that is used in peaceful times as a storage room. The casemate is like a storage room. It has one entrance. You can see the entrance here. Here you've got the double wall, and this is a huge wall. This is not a small wall. We estimated for the whole wall, for that whole 2.3 hectare site, they moved an amount of 200,000 tons of stones. This was not a Bedouin chief. This was not a little tent village. 200,000 tons of stones that had to not just be moved, that had to be hewn. They were quarried. They were put together by very, very well educated craftsmen, by stonemasons, and they assembled. Nothing of that has mortar, by the way. These are mortarless walls. They're still standing after 3,000 years. These are mortars. Of course, some of them have been buried, but some of them were exposed at the top as well, as we saw from the first photo. In peaceful times, they were used, the double wall had some space in between. They were used to store things. They were used like an extra room. In war times, the space in between would be filled up with dirt and would create this impenetrable, huge-sized wall. I mean, this is, if you take all this together, this is in feet, that's about 2 meters in feet, 2 times 3, 6 feet. This is a wall that runs 6 feet thick. Then, of course, it goes up, and on top, it is covered with a wooden structure where soldiers could walk on top and defend the city. So this is a huge construction, massive fortification. Only a central administration is able to put all this together. What did the minimalists say? No central administration, no big buildings. Well, let's see. Let's move on. There's some of our excavators inside the casemate, just to give you a little bit of a scale. These are big structures. Let's look at the western gate. We saw this morning a 6-chambered gate. Here we've got a 4-chamber gate. Same principle, just a 6-chamber gate is an expansion of a 4-chamber gate. So we have the same Judean architecture that is in the taking place in the 10th century already there. The 4 gates, if you look to the other side, it's exactly the same. You've got exactly the same layout. This is the one facing the Elah Valley as you go up back to Hebron and Jerusalem. If you look at the next slide, you have a beautiful reconstruction. Very good. I've learned that my slideshow is too heavy, too many images, so it always takes time for the computer to recover between the slides. So which is probably good. I shouldn't go too fast. This is a beautiful artist's reconstruction. Giselle Hasel has drawn that, Dr. Hasel's wife. She's a wonderful artist, where she reconstructs based on the buildings that we found, on the remaining walls, and of course she reconstructs that on the basis of knowledge, what we know about how houses looked like. But this is the gate here, built up to the top, defendable from the top. It's usually stones at the bottom, mud brick at the top, and then wooden structures across here. This is where you would come out, and inside are the 4 chambers. So this is a big complex. Right next to it, the gate plaza where things take place, and then the buildings that connect to the gate. It gives us a good impression of how that looked like in antiquity. We also found lots of interesting objects, not just pottery, and I will mention a number of those. We found a shrine model, an inscription which turned out to be the oldest Hebrew inscription, imported where from other places, a huge destruction layer with storage vessels and seals. And seals, of course, my heart beats a little bit faster as soon as I see a seal. And I had the privilege of writing the chapter on the Egyptian scarabs that we found. We found all in all 9 scarabs from Egypt, objects from Egypt. That, of course, tells us a lot about the importance of the site as well. In addition to that, we found many iron and bronze weapons, and we conducted a radiometric dating project that had 2 independent radiometric dating projects. So we used different methodologies, not just the Bible. We didn't just say, okay, there's Sha'arim, there are 2 gates, so it must be. That would be exactly the same approach as what we've just discussed. We use a lot of other methodologies and bring them all together and say, yes, that must be. We use radiometric dating, and I could talk a long time about the validity of radiometric dating in that specific time period. And I will just say at this point that we have a so-called upper and lower threshold for radiometric dating, which, depending on who you listen to, lies at about 4,000 or 3,000 BC, and on the lower level at about 700 BC. So this is really in a very safe, range of radiometric dating, and can be verified by other ways of benchmarking, like dendrochronology or something like that. So we had 2 radiometric dating, both samples. How do we do that? We collect organic material, preferably olive pits. An archaeologist gets very excited when he finds olive pits, or she. And because this is perfect organic material in an old storage vessel within the excavation, you immediately, you never touch it with your hands or with any organic material, no gloves, nothing. And you have to teach that to the student first, because they come to you with their hand and say, look, I found an olive pit. And you say, great, give it to me. And you throw it over the wall, because it's not valuable anything anymore. It doesn't have any more value. And then you teach them, when you find olive pits, you never touch them. You use a metal object. You bring aluminum foil. You put it into that aluminum foil and prevent it from any contamination. And we send those samples very carefully off to our preferred lab is at Oxford University. They have a radiometric dating lab, and we've consistently used them over the years. And if you look at the dating of that, it dates it in that exactly time period of 1020, 980 BC with an 68.2% probability of a destruction somewhere between 1006 and 970 BC. This was our first radiometric dating project. Our second came out very much like that as well, and put the dating of Khirbet Qeiyafa in the time that corresponds exactly to the biblical dating of the activities of King Saul and David. So this is a site that started during the time of Saul, but really flourished during the time of David, and we believe that David was the one who fortified the site. Let's move on. Well, the minimalists had a couple of problems. What did they do? The mythological paradigm that I presented at the beginning got a first knock with the Tel Dan inscription. I showed you the Tel Dan description. When they suggested on the basis of that, well, it wasn't just mythos, the people were there, but they came much later, they were just tribal chiefs. Then we came with Khirbet Qeiyafa, a highly fortified site, and that is dated exactly into the time period. The next reaction was very interesting. In 2008, they moved from methodological paradigm via the low chronology paradigm to an ethnographic paradigm. They said, well, that is all fine, and we believe that Khirbet Qeiyafa can be dated to this time, but we do not believe that Judeans lived at the site. So they asked the question, who really lived there? Was it Philistines, Judeans, or Canaanites? Or was it an incursor from the north? Was it a camp or a city that was built by Saul? Were they Israelites? Now this is a far way off from Israel, actually. It's in the southern part of Judah. And you will find scholarly article on each of those options. And they zoomed in on the Philistines and the Canaanites. They said, well, it wasn't Judeans, it was Canaanites. Now, there are a couple of problems related to that. And let's look how Khirbet Qeiyafa, how we have to answer that question. So the question is really, we have the site. It looks suspiciously like biblical Sharaim, has 2 gates. It dates suspiciously, not suspiciously, exactly into the chronology of David. But now comes the next attack. Is it a Judean site? Was it really a Judean site? And I'm going to briefly present 6 points that I think contribute to our understanding of Khirbet Qeiyafa being positively a Judean site. We talk about urban planning, cooking habits. We've just had a wonderful meal. Thank you very much for the delicious meal. As we're speaking, could I ask for a bit of water? Thinking of meal. I'll be running dry at some stage here. And if we look at photos from Israel, I'm going to get even more thirsty. When we are out at the dig, we call for water breaks every 15 minutes. Every 15 minutes, there's somebody that shouts, water break! So let's have a water break, if you have water, because the danger of dehydration is so great. I mean, we have taken students to the hospital to get a drip, and it happens, and you can preach to them. So we've started to call for water breaks every 15 minutes, and that helps. Administration, a third point. A fourth point, writing in language. Fifth point, geopolitical location. And the sixth point is cult. And we'll see finds from Kibbutz Kaiafa that all confirm that this must have been really a Judean site. So let's go into this. All right, thank you very much. Let's go first into the idea of urban planning. We have a very interesting way how the city was built. Thank you so much, Sam. The city is really built up from the wall towards the inside of the city. So the wall preceded the buildings. Archaeologically, that's very clear. You have buildings abutting a wall. In archaeology, if something abuts something else, what it abuts is earlier. I think that makes perfect sense. So we have a city wall abutting houses. First the wall, somebody built the city with an urban plan. Here is, in this strategic position, is where I want to build the city, and then they started building houses against that. There's a belt of houses that runs against the casemate city wall and integrates the casemate wall rooms into the buildings. Excuse me. If you look at this beautiful houses, these are all houses that abut the walls. Each of them had a little storage place in the casemate. It's like it's nice big walls. It's like your fridge, your walk-in fridge. These big walls keeps it nice and cool. So this is the perfect thing to keep your pizzas frozen and all that stuff. If you compare this, interestingly, with other cities, other clearly Judean cities like Tel el-Nasbet, Tel Bet Mizim, Beersheba, these are clearly Judean cities. They have exactly the same of architectural layout. The houses are built against the walls, and then from there they build them upwards, and usually somewhere at the center of a site, if there is one, there is a big administrative building. So this is typical. The next point, cooking habits. We have one very interesting part of archaeology, which is zooarchaeology or paleozoology. Either name works. These are people trained in zoology that study ancient bones. We have a bone specialist. He's a wonderful gentleman, Ed Maher, that joins us every year. He never excavates. He just sits in the camp and counts bones. When we find a bone, we immediately put it into a bone bag, which is a paper bag like you find at a grocery store. And it can't go into plastic. It has to go into paper. And we put all the bones in there, mark them where they come from, etc., etc. And then in the afternoon, it goes to the bone specialist. He has a helper that washes all the bones on a daily basis. So the bones are washed, and then they're analyzed. And he analyzes all the bone remains. Why do we do that? What could we learn from bone remains? We're not talking about human bones. We're talking about animal bones. Diet. What was eaten and what wasn't eaten. Now, interestingly, in all we have analyzed thousands and thousands of animal bones. No pig bones, which are known from Canaanite and Philistine side. We had a joke there on the side. We said, if you find a pig bone, just throw it over the wall. We never found one, don't worry. But that was the standing joke there. It was so rare that we started joking about it, because it was so clear that the people who lived at Kibbutz Kaiafa, the biblical Sha'arayim, followed a specific diet, and that diet happens to be what we read in Leviticus 11. No pig bones at all. The baking trays, they use baking trays, beautiful baking trays. They're put over a cone-shaped oven, and they're made out of clay. On the bottom, they're all black. They have little holes there. And there you make your pita bread. This is the typical bread that was made in ancient times. We only know those baking trays from Judean sites, not at Philistine sites. So if we talk at cooking habits, it is all definitely Judean. So our third point, administration. I showed you this morning the stamped jar handles. Now we're talking 300 years earlier than what we saw this morning. Do you remember the stamped jar handles which says belonging to the king and Hebron? Now these jar handles, we have a tradition of those jar handles. So the IRS didn't start at King Hezekiah, it went even earlier. We have here the earliest form of the stamped jar handle, and they have been called, they seriously have now the name, the Caiapha handles. This has become a technical name, because that is the site where we have found over 600 impressed jar handles. They are just thumb imprinted. In other words, when the vessel was made, when the storage vessel was made, the clay wasn't dry yet and wasn't fired yet. Somebody very deliberately, in a very specific place, pressed their thumb into the soft clay. And then it was baked. And you had a permanent mark there. And this is the beginning of the taxation system in Judah in the 10th century. What does it mean if you have a taxation system? You need a central administration. You tax something, it goes into a storage place and to the king. So there is a central administration that has that. Here are the reconstructed jars. We have reconstructed a huge number of those. By the way, very exciting news, in November, I think it's 17th of November, I'm pretty sure that it's the 17th of November, a new museum opens on the mall in Washington, D.C. I don't know if you've heard about that. It is a Bible museum, and it has been heavily sponsored by the owner of Hobby Lobby, who are Christians. You might have heard something about it in the news. There was some conflict between government and them about artifacts. They have assembled a huge collection of artifacts, and they're opening a Bible museum where they try to show the Bible. They have a lot of Bible manuscripts, but they also, to kick off that museum, they will have an exhibit on Kirbet Caiapha, which has been running in the Bible Lands Museum in Israel for about 2 years. I visited this May and met with some of the curators there. They've done a wonderful job there. And they take this exhibit plus other objects, and they will transpose it to Washington, D.C., to the mall area. And this is where you can see it from the 17th of November onwards, an exhibit on Kirbet Caiapha. San Diego to Washington, is that far? It's just around the corner. I'll have to do part of the way tomorrow morning at 6. Anyway, so there will be some of those jars, some of those vessels will actually be part of that exhibit. So you can see it today on the screen, and in 4 weeks you can see it in Washington if you happen to go up there. This was the first part of income tax. These are the the finger imprinted jar handles with the full objects. These are about that size. These are not small little vessels. These are big storage vessels. Here we've see another one. There you've got the complete jar. We have called them the Caiapha jars, and this is how they are now widely described. And here's the impressed jar handle. Central administration. We have also not found just the jars. We have also found a huge storage building in Area F. Part of the last excavation seasons, we found a big building with a row of pillars, clearly not a private house. It was a storage room where all those jars were found. If we look at the jar handles, we saw some of the later developments today. This is the Lamech jar handle, and we have a number of different traditions that go all the way down to the time of the exile, post-exile. This was really the development of the taxation system. One cannot call it any other way. I'm going to take a little break. I mean, we've done a lot of points now. I will talk a little bit about how does a day on the dig sound like. Just to give you a mental break, why don't we all get up for a moment and take a deep breath and imagine ourselves being there on the site right now. It's 5 o'clock in the morning. and we had just woken up, that we fill and carry out, that we sieve. We have fortunately a shade net. And if we wouldn't have that, it would be really hot. It still is hot, but thanks to God for the big shade nets. But you have to manage those nets, and there's a lot of wind during the day. So we are in the holes underneath the shade nets. All right, the computer's still recovering from the previous slide. All right. Here's one of our students. I think she is actually from Northern California, if I remember correctly. I think Melissa is her name. I think she comes from Northern California, if I remember correctly. And she's working in a huge destruction layer. I mean, look at all the broken pottery vessels, and look the tool that she has in her hand. There's the paintbrush. She's lovingly exposing a storage vessel, and she's taken her time, and it took a couple of days to come to the point where she is right now, and we had a beautiful photo that's at the end of it. There's somebody throwing away the dirt, and if you're allergic to dust, you might think once more. But this is where the dust flies, and you find yourself in the middle of all of that. Students, this is when we come into important contexts, like floors of important buildings, we fill them into bags and then send them up to Jerusalem to be wet sifted. There's a wet sifting project in Jerusalem that wet sifts, which finds much more objects than you can actually by dry sifting. That brings even better results there. We do a lot of survey work. There's our surveyor, Danny Perez. He's doing a PhD at the moment in Nevada in archaeology, and one of our volunteers. The wonderful thing about our excavations is that we are teaching excavations. We teach the students every single thing that you have to know about excavating. And this includes work on the GPS total station that you see there, working with the computers for data entry and drawings, pottery washing, everything. This is here where we put the science together for the photography. Every important context is photographed, and you have to all mark them. Oh, this is my oldest son. We sometimes find things that are not so old. There's Jonathan finding a little tortoise. And as you can see, it really gets dusty at times. You just turn around and suffer. There's no other way. There's no other way to avoid it. And these are the rewarding moments. Judith, one of our theology and archaeology double majors, wonderful young lady. She's graduated. She's now at seminary at Andrews. Wonderful person. She found this on the right-hand side, or in her right hand, left from you. This is a grinding stone used to make flour from wheat, a grinding stone, beautiful grinding stone. And there this is not even a dipper juglet. This is such a small little juglet. This was probably used for perfume. So very special, important commodities. You know the story when Jesus' feet are anointed. This is probably something like that. A little and we even topped that, or really made it even smaller. This is a student that studies at IS in the Philippines, but is originally from Zimbabwe. He's doing a PhD at IS, and he found this super small little juglet. I've never seen a smaller juglet than that. Finely made, incredibly fine made, beautiful. This is at 12 o'clock. We are done. We go down the tell, and every morning we carry those containers up with water, and in the afternoon we carry them down empty, hopefully. And we go to the bus and are happy that there is a day over. In the afternoon, we come home. Then there's immediately lunch. You just wash hands. and then you eat lunch, and after lunch you take a shower, and this is the most glorious moment of the day, when you wash everything off. I must say, I've been at an excavation in the country of Jordan where we had exactly 60 seconds time to wash ourselves, because there was a water shortage, and of course there was no warm water, only cold water, which is okay. It doesn't wash off so well, but okay, you're among equals there. So now everybody is in the same position, let's put it this way. 1 minute showering, and this was the highlight of the day. In Israel, we don't have these problems, fortunately. After the shower, you take a siesta. You just lie out on your bed, and you're gone. You're gone. And at 4:30, you wake up, and everybody comes together to wash pottery. The pottery that we find every day, we take with us. In the afternoon, it is washed, and then it's laid out for drying. And the pottery of the previous day is red. These are our volunteers as they wash pottery. And it's always a fun social time. They talk together. Sometimes you find neat things. This was a moment when in 2008 an inscription was found. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then it's pottery time reading. The directors of the dig, they read the pottery. They sit on long tables. You have the pottery spread out. And then we read pottery. That is, the square supervisors stand around, take note, and then we basically say, okay, this belongs to this period, this belongs to this period, this belongs to that period. It's always a very intense piece of the day, very tiring if you are one of the people that analyze, and it goes incredibly fast. You know, everybody needs to be on their toes there. And it takes us a good 2 hours to complete that task, you know, depending on how much we excavated the day before. But this is a crucial moment. This is where we know, when we know where we are. Because if you like cars, you probably know the difference between a 1960, I always use that example of a Ford Mustang, until I learned that a Ford Mustang 1960 doesn't exist. So I had always use that example. You know the difference between a 1960 Ford Mustang and a 2017. And somebody very kindly came to me and pointed out, you know, there wasn't a Ford Mustang in 1960. So when did they start? 64. What is 4 years between brothers and sisters? Anyway, I've switched to Mercedes because there were 1960 Mercedes. You know the difference. We're going to have a question and answer time during that period. So any question and answers, questions, you keep the questions, I keep the answers for a little bit later. So let's move on. So that's pottery washing time, pottery analysis. And as we look at the shapes of the pottery, we are able to say, okay, this belongs into that period, this belongs into that period, this belongs into that period. Sometimes we heatedly discuss things there. You know, the sparks fly and everybody's tired, but it's a very essential part of our work, very important part of our work. Let me talk about the fourth aspect. So back to the mental work again. We had a bit of a break now. The fourth aspect is writing, and this is the Kilbit Kayafa inscription. In 2008, during pottery washing, we found a student, a wonderful student, which we are all very grateful for. He was not a Southern student. I'd love to claim him as a Southern student, but he wasn't. He was from Korea, and he dug with our partner university from the Hebrew University, and he is a wonderful person. He has an incredible eye. He finds the most interesting things. He found, as he was washing pottery, he would look down, and he suddenly realized that the piece of pottery that he had in his hand, which is about that size, that the piece of pottery that in his hand had writing on it, ink written on it. He immediately went to a supervisor and showed it to him, and that started the discovery of the oldest Hebrew inscription that has been found up to date. There is a drawing of that. It was, of course, already, it had been there for 3,000 years to begin with. in the ground, unprotected. It had also begun to scrub. So there were a couple of places where letters have been missing. But this is a clearly Hebrew text, and I don't want to get too technical about it because there has been a debate if it's really Hebrew, or if it's Canaanite. What is it? There are forms on that text, Hebrew, that only occur in Hebrew. This is a word that only occurs in Hebrew. It's ta'as. It's from the verb azar. If you happen to know Hebrew, I might only be speaking to Samuel right now. But it is clearly Hebrew. It doesn't occur in the other Semitic languages like that. It's a Semitic, definitely Semitic, but we think early Hebrew inscription, and it's very unlike what we have in terms of inscription from Philistine sites that have a totally different language. The translation, there are 5 different readings of the same inscription because there are so many gaps. But there are a number of words, and they are bolded, that are very clearly to be read and are not easily mistaken. There's one reading from Émile Puech, a French scholar from the École Biblique, a Franciscan order in Jerusalem, and another one from a Jewish scholar, Gershon Galil, from Haifa. The first one, do not oppress and serve God. Then there's a gap, the spoiled him her, the judge and the widow wept, over the resident alien and the child. Just focus for the moment, you can read this yourself, focus on the moment, on the bold words. These are texts that we know. These are not direct Bible quotations. However, the words and the context that we have, you could read this in any book from the Pentateuch to the prophets, because this is ancient Israel ethics, Old Testament ethics. Take care of the people on the fringes of society. Widows, orphans, the poor, and the aliens. This is already in the Old Testament. This is the oldest Hebrew text from the 10th century BC. And it already has, it's not just an economic text. The inscription that was previously the oldest inscription is an agricultural calendar from Gezer. Beautiful document. It's from 925 BC. But, I mean, nothing against farming. It is an agricultural calendar. I mean, farming is a wonderful occupation, and it says you have to plant this then it's harvest this then. But this is a text that is so close to what we read in the Bible. And we know already that in the 10th century, this is a reflection of ancient Old Testament ethics. Wonderful text, proved to be the oldest Hebrew inscription. But it didn't end here. We found another inscription, and this was a jar that was broken in pieces, and on the neck of the jar, this is the neck of the jar here, we had an inscription, not written in ink, but incised into the soft clay before burning, and then it was burned and became absolutely permanent. I mean, beautiful preserved. I mean, it's easy to read. There's a shin there, beautiful to be read. What does it say? There's the drawing of that again, and there came I'll come to its meaning in a moment. There came a very interesting moment. I don't know if you know the guys on the photo there. Anybody recognizes this gentleman? This is Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and this is such an important find, and right next to him is Za'ar Ganor, one of the excavation directors, and Joseph Garfinkel, my colleague from the Hebrew University. And Yossi, his name, we call him Yossi, told us there was a phone call from the Prime Minister's office, and he said, in half an hour the Prime Minister wants to see the vessel. And he said, I didn't even have time to change out of my jeans, you know. So he went there and stood there in his jeans and explained this artifact to Netanyahu. Why? It has been published since then in a very important journal, in the BASOR, Bulletin of the American School of Oriental research, and it dates to the, let me just move this on here, it is a very important inscription because it has the name of a biblical person on there. Ishbaal, also known as Eshbaal, son of Beda. Now, this name appears in the Bible in the context of the 10th century as one of the sons of Saul. This is one of the sons of Saul. He appears in the book of Samuel as Eshbaal, man of Baal, and then in Chronicles he appears as Ishbosheth. Probably somebody corrected that name. So this was a second very important inscription find. So we have now an interesting discussion. A lot of people said, well, writing is relatively late. They think like evolution. Now, people were primitive and then more sophisticated. But if you look at the Bible, you know that everything was very good at the beginning. And from there it went downward. So writing, technology, all of that. I mean, you've seen the incredible artwork on the seals that I've shown. They are so small. People were at a very early stage to create the most wonderful things. What is the geopolitical importance of Khirbet Qeiyafa? You see here that is on the border between Judah and Philistia. It overlooks the Elah Valley. This is the main road leading up from the coastal plain into the hill country. It's right across from Philistine Gulf, about 8 miles away, a huge city. And this is where the battle of David and Goliath takes place, which of course has captured the imagination of artists from, I don't know how many centuries. You know, you have the battle of Goliath being shown so many times. So this was an important place. Why? We have a couple of other objects. We have a barrel juglet from Cyprus. Now Cyprus is not around the corner. Cyprus is an island in the Mediterranean off the coast of Syria. Interchange between a city like that and a barrel juglet from Cyprus, these juglets are dated very specifically into the time period that we are dealing with. And secondly, it shows us that there is an economical importance. This was an object of importance. This was like, I don't know if that's a good comparison. German porcelain, Meißner porcelain. Have you ever heard of Meißner porcelain? It's a very famous German porcelain. You know, I would never be able to afford it. Maybe somebody of you has it at home. If you have it at home in your drawer, you are an important person. This is the type of relationship. If you had a Cyprus barrel juglet, you were an important person, and a city that had objects like that was an important city because there was economic interchange. This is a couple of views of those juglets, beautiful juglets, very finely made. Another one, the one that interests me, scarabs from Egypt. Beautiful scarabs from Egypt. Of course, this site lies very close to the Egyptian border, 10th century. Egypt still tried to maintain some control over Palestine. The fact that we have found 9 scarabs at the site tells us that it was an economic important site, but also military important, because either those scarabs got there by economic exchange, because they were trade objects as well, they were important and valuable objects, or they got there through military booty. That the Judeans that were stationed at that fortress city got them in a skirmish against Egyptians. So in any way, it shows again the importance of the site. These are all the different Egyptian seals that were found in one of the areas, and beautiful objects. Scarabs are fascinating objects, and one could speak a long time about that. Let me go one back. Another important object is the Ashdod ware, Philistine red slip pottery. This is very delicate, beautifully painted pottery, and we find the same type of pottery at Qeiyafa as well. This is a strainer here. You see the holes here. You put a liquid that needs to be strained, has still some sediment or some fibers in it, and you run it through the strainer. We have very similar objects from different sides. Of course, if you go to the Philistine sides, you have an abundance of these objects. If you go to Caiapha, you have one or two. So this doesn't make it a Philistine site, but it makes it a site that even had exchange with the Philistines. Geopolitical importance of the site as well. Caiapha, only earlier types of Ashdod were found, allowing distinction between two phases. Let's not get too technical about that. It was also an administrative center. On the top of the site, there was a big building found, and again I say it was in the last season that we excavated that building. At the top of the site, right where you see this, here the excavation tent here, this is where the building was found. It's a huge building. It's the biggest building from the 10th century, about 1,000 square feet, 30 by 20 by 25 to 25 meters. It was an administrative building. It is, one could even go as far as that, and one has to say that very carefully. It would have been the place where David would have gone to bed when he visited Kirbat Caiapha. It was the royal administrative place where he would have had his resting place when he visited Kirbat Caiapha. Wonderful location. If we look at cult, and this is our last point here, cult at Kirbat Caiapha, we found some very fascinating objects. Shrine models, these are two shrine models, basalt altars, libation vessels. Let me look at a couple of those. There were 3 cultic rooms that we excavated at Kirbat Caiapha. They are in sharp contrast to Canaanite or Philistine cult, which was practiced in temples. These were private buildings. And then, very important little sentence at the top, we have found no anthropomorphic or zoomorphic figurines in those cultic rooms. No representations of the god. An iconic worship style. No cultic, no veneration of a figurine or of a human or animal form of the god. These are the cultic places. 2 of them were located right next to the gate. And we know, of course, that in the 10th century there was this movement from, where was the Ark of Covenant before it went to the temple in Jerusalem? In the tent during the wilderness wanderings, and then Shiloh, and it was Bet Shemesh as well. There are 3 or 4 places that if you read the book of Judges and the beginning of the book of Samuel, Bethel is one of them as well. When you read all this, you get the idea that the Ark of Covenant was being moved around and kind of between the tribes. And it almost seems when you read how God reacts to David's desire to build a temple in Jerusalem, then Solomon, it almost seems that God is reluctant to centralize worship. On the one hand, it was good to centralize worship to prevent imitation worship in other places. On the other hand, didn't God says, I don't need a place to dwell among you in a specific place. Revelation has a beautiful image when God says, and God will tabernacle with you. And it's a word in the Greek in Revelation that could be translated, he will camp with you. So in other words, in the new earth, God will come over and camp in our backyard with the kids and with ourselves. And then he moves to you, to your house, and he will tabernacle with you. God wanted to be with his people. Of course, it was also dangerous because it produced a lot of alternative places of cult, and we saw the results of that this morning in the lecture on Hezekiah. There's the open piazza next to the one of the gates. There's a shrine right next to the gate with a little altar and the platform. Very important artifacts there. These are shrine models, building models found in a shrine near the city gate. And it's so interesting. One is of stone, one is of pottery. And the form of those is highly, highly interesting. There's the pottery one, there has 3 little birds up there. Some of them have broken off. There's a rope, kind of a twisted thing on top, and those 2 objects, the stone and the clay one, have shed so much light on what we read in the Bible about the construction of the temple. We have the curtain, the parochet, that divides the holy from the holies. This seems to be an early depiction of that. There are roof beams, very much what we read in the Bible. There's a pillar on each side. How many pillars had the temple in front of them? 2 pillars as well. There's a line in each side of the door. A lot of those elements we find in the temple construction of the temple in Jerusalem. Here you see the details of this shrine model. If you go to the stone building, this is a beautiful reconstruction. Some people have called this the most important artifact of Kirbet Kayafa, because on the basis of that, Bible translations have been changed, because we know now that specific Hebrew terms in the Bible should be translated in a different way because of those recessed door frames. Let me give the computer a bit of a break here again. Here it is. This is the shrine model. It was intentionally smashed when we found it. This is how it has been. The previous photo was how it looked like when it was put together again. Now, interestingly, that if you look at the size of that, it is exactly like the temple dimensions. The door size is 10 by 20 centimeters. There's a relationship 1 to 2, exactly like the measurements in the temple. You have the same type of measurement in the temple architecture as well. There are 7 groups of room beams, 3 planks in each triglyphs. This is a Hebrew term that we have now understood. And those of you who are in construction, if you put a roof rafter across, it makes much more sense to group them in groups of 3, because they can carry much more weight than to space them out one by one. That's what I have been taught. If you look, this form actually shows up even in the Acropolis in Athens in exactly the same way. We call them now an architectural element. It's called a triglyph there, and this comes initially from Kirbet Kayafa. This is an artist reconstruction of Solomon's temple in the Harvard Museum. Based on Kirbet Kayafa, we have now a different description of what they saw. We now know what those recessed door frames and window frames are and how much they were recessed. And this is a new reconstruction of Solomon's temple based on what we've learned from Kirbet Kayafa. So this is a artist reconstruction of Solomon's temple based on Kirbet Kayafa, with the roof beams, with the recessed windows that we've seen on that shrine. So why is Kirbet Kayafa a Judean city? Let's summarize that and come to the end here, and then we can have some question and answers. First of all, there's typical Judean urban planning. We've seen it. The cooking habits. We have no pig bones and these typical baking trays. We have the stamped jar handles, the administrative system. We have the Hebrew inscription, which is very different from Philistine's inscription. We've seen the geopolitical importance of export and imports at the site. We have cult, no graven images, as the Bible prescribes it. We have a new type of temple architecture then, which is replicated in Solomon's temple. So all of this points into the same direction. This is really a Judean site. So is David historical? Well, there's urbanization. There's not just villages. These are not tent villages. They are pre-planned cities. They are fortified. They are built around or from the walls. There's administration. There's writing. There's literacy. And this is not the center. That was the periphery. So there was somebody at Kirbet Kayafa, not in Jerusalem, at the outskirts of the empire, in a fortress, that was able to write an ethically, morally sound text on a piece of pottery sherd. And there's cult and cultic architecture there. We have a national state developing, very much like we learn from the Bible. Let me end with two quotes. Philip Davies from the University of Sheffield wrote in a book, In the Search of Ancient Israel. It was published in 1992, 1 year before the Tel Dan inscription was found. Just think of the timing of this. And he wrote, the Israel of the biblical literature is, at least for the most part, not an historical entity at all. There was no historical Israel. The biblical empire of David and Solomon has not the faintest echo in the archaeological record. And then he was careful, as yet. And he probably has been thankful ever since that he wrote those last two words into this sentence. The second quote comes from National Geographic. It was in the 2010 December edition. They ran a whole title cover story on Kirbet Kayafa and the battle over King David. They called it The Search for King David, New Discoveries in the Holy Land, and they reported on Kirbet Kayafa. CNN ran a documentary. BBC came to interview and ran a video documentary. And National Geographic concluded, you take David and his kingdom out of the book. Which book are we talking about? The Bible. And you have a different book. The narrative is no longer a historical work, but a work of fiction. If we take David out of the Bible, it's not just a work of fiction, because we have the son of David, the Messiah. If there is no historical David, the dominoes begin to fall, one after the other, and they don't stop at the Messiah. Because if there is no historical David, there is no Messiah. And Jesus was just a fraud. So this goes very deep. This is not an optional debate. If you have faith in the Messiah, you also need to think about the historicity of ancient Israel. And thank God that he put us in the position to, sorry, I didn't bring that up here. I had that on my screen. I didn't bring this up here on the slides. Thank God that he put Southern Adventist University in a position to be part of a very big project that really contribute to the historicity of King David. It was at a meeting, academic meeting. It was in Boston, 2014, if I remember correctly. And we had a big session on Kirbet Kayafa, 8 papers, one after the other with a break in between. And then there were respondents. And I presented on the seals, and we all presented on different areas. And one of the respondents was William Deaver, Bill Deaver, very famous archaeologist. He was professor at the University of Arizona, retired, probably one of the most prominent American archaeologists of the last 50 years. He's written some very significant books. Some of them are very, very polemic. He was Professor Hasel's, Dr. Hasel's, Michael Hasel's advisor at the University of Arizona, where he has doctoral studies in archaeology. He became a personal friend and mentor. And eventually, when he retired, he bequeathed his whole teaching collection of artifacts to Southern Adventist University, which became the basis for our museum. He's been a long-standing friend. He is still a very prominent archaeologist, has just completed a huge book on ancient Israel and history. He was the respondent to that session in 2014 when we read all the papers. He got up. It was an auditorium bigger than that. It was full to the brim. People were sitting along the floor, on the corners, on the sides, on the walls. There were people everywhere, we read our papers, and he got up. It got very quiet. Because when he speaks, everybody listens. He is the old man of archaeology, and he speaks very well. He speaks very well. And he has a deep, sonore voice, and he started, I think we have all seen today that Kibbutz Kayafa is the death of minimalism. And everybody gasped. I mean, for him to say something like that was an incredible statement of affirmation of the biblical text and of the work that has been done at Kibbutz Kayafa. It was people looked up, and of course some were pleased, others were not very pleased at all. And the debate has gone on. It has not stopped. People will not just take things like that in academics. They will continue to the debate. But we can thank God that he has put an Adventist institution in the midst of all of that. And we can praise him for leading us safely through that. And I hope you have learned something about Kibbutz Kayafa, the biblical Sha'arayim, about archaeology, and we have time for questions, I guess. If I have not utterly exhausted you. Usually my strategy is to exhaust you to such an extent that you don't have questions anymore.